Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing great today. It's a Saturday morning here in Minnesota. We've got a little snow and some cold, but it's been a pretty mild winter thus far, which is probably a good thing with the epidemic, pandemic, whatever, still raging. Hopefully things are starting to have a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's hard to really truly say. I hope you all enjoy my Savoy exposition. I'm proud of it. I'm happy. I hope a lot of people watch it, keep watching it. I'm disappointed that at the second episode, part 2, I forgot to put in my slides. I've taken all those pictures of those records and presented them in the slides, and I did them in part 1. And I waited to do part 2 for a couple days. My wife was working from home that day, so it had my whole rhythm different. I work out of her office. She was in there. So I was trying to be kind of quick so I didn't distract her from her meetings. And I forgot to put my slides in. And I can't edit it without taking it down and adding them, which would lose all the comments and all the views it's got. And as disturbed and as disappointed as I am, I'm probably just going to leave it as it was. It kind of sticks in my craw, though, you know. And I was hoping that would be a great piece for people to go to for years to learn about Savoy, because there's so little Savoy on YouTube to learn. And part 1 I'm really happy with. Part 2 is still great, but I just wish those slides would have made it in there. And I guess I'm kind of curious to hear what you guys think. Is part 1 more enjoyable, more watchable with the extra photographs and stuff? My wife said that watching part 1 was enjoyable with all the photos I put in there. It made it much easier for her to focus and pay attention and put a face to who I was talking about. A little feedback on that would be appreciated. I've been watching quite a bit of YouTube lately on a lot of different subjects. I probably ask for money less than I should. A lot of these channels do it every episode, you know. So I'll just mention it quickly. If you want to go to Patreon and donate, you know, as little as $5 a month, it'd be appreciated to help us through this time. If you have it, if you don't, understandable. But if you get anything of worth from this channel, if you have it to share, it would be appreciated. I'll leave it at that. There's also some great merchandise to be had at the Jazz Shepherd merchandise shop. There's some great little designs. This is one of the newer ones, Jazz Shepherd World Tour. And there's not a world tour, it's just a cool looking t-shirt based off a concert tour idea. But that's another great way you can support the channel, is buying some merchandise. That's always appreciated. At the end of this episode, I'm going to tag on another Michel story. It's a story I've told you before, but I told you what he told me, and this is going to be more directly what Kenny Drew himself told him. And so, no, he can tell it better than I can tell it, and it's a story worth sharing. And I hope you all enjoy the Jean-Michel. I hope you all enjoy the Savoy. I think I'm going to do Blue Note 1500 next, where I present the entire 1500 series in a 2-part episode, do the slides. 1500 Blue Note's going to be a lot more familiar to almost everybody. There'll be a lot less titles that people don't know, but I still think it'll be interesting and a good guide for people. I know there's a lot of Blue Note stuff on YouTube, but a lot of it's kind of, I don't want to be insulting, but amateurish, beginnerish. And I'm not talking in terms of the editing or the show itself. I'm talking about just their perception of the label and the knowledge of the history. There's a lot of people there who know more than me, but not a lot of them are YouTubers or digital age, it seems like. And I'm on the cusp. I'm approaching 50. 48, 49 in a few months here. So technology for me is still a challenge at times, but we do what we can, you know. So if anyone knows how I could get those slides into that last episode without having to take the episode down, I'd also be interested in hearing about that, because I would add them in there. Because I'm hoping that's a video people go to for years and watch to learn about Savoy. And I wish those slides had made it into the part 2. I did, however, put that little video out there of all 100 records kind of flashing. And I think that's a pretty cool tidbit that kind of makes up for the slides not being in part 2. But that being said, I want to talk to you about Coleman Hawkins for a second. Coleman's such a brilliant player, and I think most jazz fans become familiar with Coleman fairly early on in their journey. You can't listen to Coltrane or Rollins and read what they had to say without hearing the greats of that era speak about Dexter Gordon and Coleman Hawkins. Like there's a direct link on and he was the true innovator of the saxophone, especially the tenor saxophone. So Hawkins has a fairly big shadow over most eras of jazz, and even into the 50s and 60s, he's still present. He's still making some darn good recordings. All his Moodsville stuff, Swingsville stuff at Prestige, his Riverside from the mid-50s, his stuff on Impulse. It's great stuff. Got this little curl right here. It's kind of bugging me. But Coleman's a really brilliant player, and he's one of the greatest innovators in the music. He does for the sax what Armstrong does for the trumpet. He becomes a better and better player over the years, always firmly rooted in the blues and feeling. He has a really broad swath of what he's comfortable playing in. From Bossa Nova and Duke Ellington to the swing bands to playing with Max Roach on We Insist, Freedom, supercharged political stuff like that, to coming out of the post-war recording band. He makes a session for a label called Joe Davis, who I'm guessing was just some little small-time impresario, and he looks for a group that he wants to record. He wants cutting edge, and he brings on Thelonious Monk in '44. The first guy to record Thelonious Monk was Coleman Hawkins, and he using him as a sideman. And those recordings have been collected here on this Prestige collection. And if those Hawkins records are anywhere else, it's probably on a 78, which I don't have a player anymore. And I don't know what other LP those recordings are on, but I do know they're on this. And Monk, you know, you can hear him in there. This song is called Flying Hawk, yeah. There's 4 tracks here: On the Bean, Recollections, Flying Hawk, and Drifting on a Reed. And there's the modernism of Coleman right there. And Monk's doing a little shuffle in the background, and the band's rounded up by Denzel Best on the drums, and the bass is Edward Robinson, a guy I can't tell you much about at all. But you'll hear Monk coming in a minute here, and this is as modern as a lot of what was happening in the early 50s here in 44. You know, it's a small group, it's breathing, full of space. It's not the best recording, but it still sounds pretty darn good. And it's always impressive whether you're hearing him playing Body and Soul before the war in the recording band, which changes the landscape of jazz, to his recordings right when he comes out at the end of the war recording banding and here with Monk. And that's because Hawkins was hanging out at Minton's up in Harlem. He was going down there, or up there you should say, and watching these young cats, Kenny Clark, Thelonious Monk, Parker and Diz, Fats Navarro. He was paying attention to what was happening. There's Monk. That's the first recorded Monk, this session. And that alone, A, makes this recording of great value, but 2, it also really lends credence to the broadness of Coleman Hawkins. His ability to hear what's new and what's happening. A lot of the old cats didn't want to mess too much with what the young cats were doing. There was a lot of resistance. Even Miles had hesitations with like some of the developments happening. Hawkins seems to always be like, "Oh, I like that, young man. Mind if I give it a go? Can I give it a whirl?" And Hawkins steps to the plate. and knocks it out of the park. And it's just an incredible display of dexterity, not just as a player, but as a listener. To hear what's coming down the pike and to be able to graft onto it and master it very quickly and eloquently. And Hawkins is a true giant, and these recordings are one more example of how brilliant a player Coleman Hawkins was. And like Ben Webster, he had a big alcohol problem, I'm told, and really soaked up the last few years of his life in the bottle. And I'm sure that's partly how we deal with stress. Right there, beautiful. How we deal with anxiety, oppression. We find our medication, whatever that would be. I want to do another throat grabber coming up. If you have a throat grabber you want to share with me, please feel free to send it to me on Facebook Messenger. It's always appreciated. I'd like to share what you guys think and some of your excitement for the music and what it makes you guys think and feel. That's important to me, and I want to give you guys that outlet. I have a few new throat grabbers lined up. Part of my issue right now is that my kids are being homeschooled these last 4 or 5 months, and that means there's usually a kid in this room during the day doing schoolwork, which hinders my ability to listen to music and also hinders the volume which I can listen to it at. And a lot of times throat grabbers need to be kind of played loud, so you're kind of doing your thing, but it's still present and it grabs you. And it's been tougher to come up with throat grabbers because my listening's been really cut down, and when I do listen, the volume's been really cut down, and so I'm not getting as much honest, just those epiphanal moments. And I don't want to fake it either. You know, I don't want to just sit down and try to find them. I like it when they grab me naturally. But it looks like the kids will be going back to school at some point here, and so hopefully I can have a little more space and time to just listen, because listening is where a lot of my inspiration comes from. A lot of my epiphanies, a lot of my aha moments just come sitting there listening and thinking and feeling, and things connect. You know, things just join up and connect, and you're like, oh yeah, I understand. And it's an interesting experience when you let jazz truly move you by just feeling. You know, and I challenge all listeners all the time. Don't listen with your ears, listen with your heart. Just listen to what that cat whose face is going to be on the cover more often than not, what do you think that guy's telling you through what he's saying? And I think it reveals so much more than the notes and the mathematics of the scales and the keys. That stuff's a byproduct. It's not the issue. The issue is it's art form expressing emotion. And when we let jazz be that, it has a power that's unrivaled. You know, it's really a truly magical thing. Another thing I want to share real quick before we get to Jean-Michel is I've noticed, I'm a huge Beatles fan. And I think if you're not a huge Beatles fan, you're missing such a huge part of the music anatomy. And I've often said they're one of the greatest bottlenecks in music. Everything before the Beatles is in the Beatles sound. And everything post-Beatles has the Beatles sound in it. And you could argue genres like heavy metal and industrial, techno, drum and bass, a lot of these sounds, the Beatles innovate a lot of this stuff well before they were subgenres of pop and rock. They also mirror the history of jazz in some ways. They started off very much being a group covering poppy dance numbers, R&B numbers, that early rock and roll, that black music. They were just doing covers of that originally, and they got good, and they realized how composition and song and space was driven, and they got good at actually doing that themselves, and they started writing some of their own good, danceable, fun compositions. And it's like the early years of jazz. It was fun, it was danceable, it was accessible, everybody could listen to it. But the Beatles got bored with playing the same chords, the same rhythms, and they wanted to push the envelope. They eventually abandoned touring because they wanted to present a new music that was much more compositionally driven, had edges of the avant-garde, had edges of even free in it. You listen to something Revolution Number 9, that's so ahead of its time. You know, it's a sonic soundscape. It's avant-gardism at an extreme. And the Beatles drop in the avant-garde, even in some of the most poppy places. Songs like Strawberry Fields Forever and A Day in the Life. It's such high-level brilliance. And they kind of abandon straight simplicity for complex originality and composition, and often what they were doing was unrepresentable live, you know. And to me, the avant-garde and jazz kind of follows some of that same, we're bored with the standard status quo, let's delve deeper into the art, which is also going to change our listener. And the Beatles definitely changed audiences 67, 68, 69 versus the early 60s, just as jazz changes its audience in the 60s as well. And the Beatles were probably on some level influenced by jazz and some of those movements, and the Beatles also influenced jazz. And you hear even great jazz artists starting to do their compositions. But here's the one great big difference. The Beatles would spend sometimes multiple sessions working on one song. And that's the difference between being the biggest, most powerful white pop group in the world versus being a bunch of American blacks that have very little economic power or authority or ability to command studio time. The Beatles had access to all the best studios in the world. And they could spend hours editing and splicing and setting up mellotrons and looping things backwards and trying infinite different vocal takes and guitar sounds, and then finding George Martin to kind of sift through it and find what worked. And all these great jazzmen, at the most great jazz records are from two different sessions, and often, almost always, these songs are complete takes. And overdubbing and editing isn't super present in jazz. There is some, you know, and there's even some great early jazz that has editing and splicing and stuff done to it. It's part of the business. It's part of making money. You know, you got to save tape when you can, because it was an expensive thing in those days. It wasn't like today with the digital, where you just press record and use up more memory. It was a different situation in those days. But the Beatles had the luxury of so much time, so much power, so much money to really sit down and hone and refine their masterpieces. And that's part of what allows them to become masterpieces, is having the time to really whittle that wood, to really shape that clay, and to remove the excess. And somehow jazz had to do that within the moment. It speaks to the virtuosity of these jazzmen, the immediacy of these jazzmen, and like the Beatles, when they went to becoming overdub studio masters, it's not really rock and roll anymore. And I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I think jazz is the same way. When it becomes overdubbed and really studio-centric and has a lot of different layers that come from different... It's not jazz anymore. It still has some elements of it. But all the overdubs, all the mixing, it's lost an immediacy and an urgency, and just the expression of how a player feels can be very different from one session to the next. It was just interesting to look at the Beatles, and I'm a huge Beatle fan. I was watching this documentary about them last night, and it's just crazy seeing how jazz and black music shapes the world. You know, blues and jazz are such powerful, universal things. And it also is interesting to think on some levels, had some of the great jazz avant-garde artists had the Beatles time frames and economics and opportunities, what would Mingus or Monk or some of those, even Ellington, what would those cats have been able to come up with? Imagine if Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn had been given 6 months at EMI Studios to do what they wanted, whatever they wanted. You know what I mean? It's an interesting thing. You know, there's no question the Beatles are the most innovative and original post-rock group to come along, and they influence and impact pretty much everything that's happened since then. And even the modern kids who might not have listened to the Beatles, who they listen to the Beatles. It's such a universal thing, and it's always going to be a barometer for. That was sick. I think it's probably Fast Tomorrow. Sure was Fast Navarro. But so yeah, the Beatles are an interesting little barometer, and it's interesting seeing how they kind of, got bored with the same standard things and wanted to delve deeper into creation and composition, and eventually just abandon the old formats and structures and pushed it all into a whole new place. So at that I'm going to wrap up what I'm going to say today. I'm going to tack on that Jean-Michel story next. Y'all have a good day. Be safe. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Hello everybody, this is Jean-Michel Beethoven. There is a new episode about 2 other stories that I have to tell you. There are many stories that I can't tell because I experience with the years through the media that when you say things, real things, many people, they don't accept, they don't like, they put you down because they don't trust you, they think that you lie, which is not true. So I decided to tell a couple of anecdotes, real true, coming from the musicians themselves who live the story, I want to talk about the story about this album. Paul Chambers Music, made in 1955, in Los Angeles. My father has the original LP, but that's at my father's. So I have the CD, just to show. That we listen to now. I knew Kenny Drew very well because Kenny used to live in Europe and especially in Denmark since 1963, I think, until when he died in 1993. So I saw Kenny many times. He was a great guy, very funny because he told you stories and he didn't laugh. So you didn't know if that was true or not. But at the end he said to you, no, it's true story. But he was very funny. Well, he was, as I said, a party guy because he loved to drink a little bit. He loved to drink, but he was funny when he drank. He was not sad or aggressive. He was very funny, great guy, great company, and one of the greatest jazz pianists ever to me. He played with everybody, from Benny Waters, the guy from the 90s, and until the Ornette Coleman or everybody. He played with everybody because everybody wanted to play with him. So that story about that album is that in that album you have Paul Chambers on bass, who is the leader. You have Kenny Drew, you have Philip Joe Jones, and you have John Coltrane. So that was the musicians of the first Miles Davis quintet, before that the one everybody knew with Red Garland at the piano. So Kenny told me that story. I can't remember for what he arrived and told me that story. That was in Zurich, in a very famous club. In Zurich, we had for 10 years, from 1980 to 1990, one of the best clubs in the world. The club was called the Wieder Bar in Zurich. The club is like the Village Vanguard or the Blue Note, you know. The musicians, the greatest musicians, jazz musicians, they played for 1 week every night, and they play for brunch on Sunday at 11 a.m. So 1 week you had J.J. Johnson, the next week you had the Modern Jazz Quartet, the next week you had Sarah Vaughan, the next week you had Thad Jones, Mel Lewis Big Band, you had everybody played there. And that was a very, very small club, maximum 80 people there, you know. So you had a small bar, a small stage, and you have a kitchen there, so you can drink with the musicians at the bar, talk with them, eat with them. That was fabulous, you know, and the best place to go, you know. So that was my main center for 10 years. Every weekend I was there, you know, spend night and day with the musicians. So I remember that night, that was the last night with the Mill Jackson and Kenny Drew Queen Trio, sorry. Mill Jackson, Kenny Drew, Pierre Boussaguet, one of the greatest bass players in Europe ever, still playing because he's about my age, so not that old, and the very great Alvin Quinn on drums. So we finished the concert, and you know, Kenny Drew was a party guy, and he said, let's go to the hotel and let's have a drink there. You know, Mel Jackson didn't drink, Alvin Quinn didn't drink, Pierre Boussaguet, you know, a glass of wine like as I do. We love wine, you know, we don't drink for drinking, you know. So we went at 4 o'clock to the hotel, very nice hotel. And I don't know how we arrived into that, but he said to us, he said, you guys, do you know that album of Paul Chambers music? And I said, sure, yes, I have. He said, man, I have something for you guys. I have a story, you know. And he said, Mel Jackson can tell you if I'm lying or not because he knew the story. So the first piano player who was hired by Miles Davis for the new quintet was Kenny Drew. Kenny Drew was the piano player at that time of Buddy DeFranco. Buddy DeFranco, the Charlie Parker of the clarinet, you know. So he was hired by Miles Davis, and they played a couple of gigs in New York, and then they directly go to LA. I think they plays at Zardes, you know, but I have to check now. I can't remember which club they play. So they play for 1 week, and on Sunday morning, they were supposed to go to the airport and to go back to New York. So the musicians were, you know, meeting at the lobby at 8 in the morning, the next morning. So musicians went at the desk and they talk, and after 30 minutes they said, but where is Miles Davis? I don't know, did you see Miles? No, I didn't see Miles. So they called the room, nobody's answering to the room, and they went to the desk and they said to the guy, where is Miles Davis? And he said, oh, he left the hotel at 6 o'clock this morning. They said, what? And the guy said, yeah, he left at 6 o'clock this morning. So here are the 4 musicians without any money. They were blocked in the hotel without nothing to eat, nothing to drink, no money, because he was supposed to pay them at the desk the next morning. Disappeared, go back to New York. So they said, what we're gonna do? And Paul Chambers said, listen guys, I know a good friend of mine who started a new label, And maybe if we do a recording session, maybe we'll pay to us our plane ticket to go back to New York. So he called the guy was okay, and they recorded the session. You know, great session. And I know that John Coltrane was a nice guy, very quiet. Philly Joe was a nice guy too, but Kenny Drew was small, very thin. But this guy, if you did some wrong things on him, he could punch you, because he was a boxer when he was a guy. He was a young kid, and later on. So he said to the guy, he said, when I be back to New York, I will go to these motherfuckers and I will punch him. He came back to New York, they did the session, they come back to New York, and the next morning, Kenny Drew arrived at Miles' home and he punched Miles. And he said, that's for you. And he left the group. So Miles was without any piano player, and that's how Red Garland came to the group, you know. And this story, everybody of the New York musicians at that time knew that story, because that was everybody knew what's happened, you know. So that's, and Mel Jackson, who was in New York at that time, he said, you punch. I didn't know that you did it. I heard that a piano player punched him very heavy, but I didn't know that was you, you know. So that was true, you know. Just to tell you that story. So bad things, as having no money, no ticket, can happen again with that fantastic album. That's a great album. And if you don't have it, buy it, you know. You can have it on CD, and you can have it on LP. I reissued it on CD with a very, that's not because of me, but I reissued it about 10 years ago with a better sound than this one, Japanese. But I bought this one just to compare. But that's a fantastic session. So that's a nice, I think that's a nice story about how things can happen sometimes.